When Dinah walked into the cafe for her shift, she didn't expect much. It was a quiet place tucked away in the corner of a busy street, the kind of spot where regulars grabbed their coffee on autopilot, barely sparing a glance for the staff. For Dinah, it was another long day. The aroma of espresso mingled with the faint sweetness of freshly baked pastries, but the comforting smell did little to ease her weariness. The afternoon lull had stretched longer than usual, with only a handful of patrons scattered across the tables. The familiar hum of quiet conversations had faded to a whisper, and the clinking of forks and knives felt louder than usual in the stillness. For Dinah, the day felt endless. Every tick of the clock dragged on, and her aching feet reminded her of the hours she'd already spent standing. She wiped down the last table near the window, her mind wandering to her growing pile of bills. Her rent was due in 2 days, and her phone bill had been sitting unpaid for weeks. Tips had been terrible that day, mostly loose change carelessly tossed onto the tables by patrons too engrossed in their phones to even acknowledge her. She let out a tired sigh, tightening her ponytail with a quick pull. "Just one more hour," she whispered under her breath, trying to will herself through it. Her manager, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a sympathetic smile, caught her gaze. With a small nod, she seemed to say, "Hang in there." But Dinah was already in autopilot mode, grabbing her order pad and heading back toward the counter. The soft chime of the doorbell broke the stillness in the cafe, snapping Dinah back to reality. She turned instinctively, her pin hovering midair, and saw a young man step inside. He was tall and lean, his plain white shirt and dark slacks giving him an air of effortless sophistication. There was nothing flashy about him, but somehow he stood out. 2 men followed closely behind him, moving in sync. They blended almost too well into the background, but their sharp, watchful eyes gave them away. Security detail, Dinah realized. This wasn't the kind of cafe that saw high-profile visitors. Most of the customers were locals, busy office workers grabbing a quick coffee or students scrolling on their laptops. Dinah couldn't remember ever serving anyone who had the presence of a celebrity, let alone someone who came with security in tow. For a moment, she froze, unsure of how to process the sight before her. Her pen hovered uselessly over her notepad, but years of training kicked in, and she pushed past her hesitation. Taking a deep breath, she straightened her apron and walked toward the far corner, where the young man had settled into a seat. "Good afternoon," Dinah said, her voice steady, her best customer service smile firmly in place. "Can I get you started with something?" The young man looked up, and for a brief second, Dinah's mind went blank. His face was striking, sharp features softened by an air of calm. There was something about him that seemed familiar, though she couldn't place it right away. But then it clicked. Barron Trump. She'd seen his face countless times in the media. He was the youngest son of the former president, his image plastered across news outlets and social media for years. Dinah felt her heartbeat quicken, but she forced herself to stay composed. He was just a customer, she reminded herself. Nothing more, nothing less. "I'll have a cappuccino," Barron said softly, his voice polite and measured. "And maybe one of those croissants." Dinah quickly jotted down the order, her pen moving automatically across the pad. "Absolutely. Anything else?" He shook his head, offering a faint smile. "That'll be perfect. Thank you." The words were simple, but there was something about the way he spoke that caught Dinah off guard. There was no pretense, no sense of entitlement. His tone carried a quiet sincerity she hadn't expected. She nodded and turned back toward the counter, clutching her order pad a little tighter than necessary. At the counter, she busied herself preparing his order, trying to shake off the odd nervous energy that had settled over her. The steam from the cappuccino machine hissed loudly, grounding her as she frothed the milk. "Why am I acting like this?" Dinah thought, shaking her head slightly. It's just Barron Trump. Her eyes flicked toward the corner table again, almost involuntarily. He sat there, his posture straight but relaxed. Unlike most customers, he wasn't glued to his phone or typing away on a laptop. Instead, he gazed out the window, his expression thoughtful, almost distant. Every so often, he sipped from the glass of water she had brought him earlier, his movements unhurried. He seemed content in his stillness, a stark contrast to the rushed, distracted energy of most patrons. Dinah placed a croissant on a plate and carefully poured the cappuccino, watching the foam settle perfectly on top. By the time she arranged everything on the tray, she had managed to calm her nerves. Walking back to his table, she felt the familiar rhythm of her work take over. "Here you go," she said, setting the cappuccino and croissant down with practiced ease. Barron looked up again, meeting her eyes. His smile was small but genuine. "Thank you." "You're welcome. Let me know if you need anything else," Dinah replied, keeping her tone neutral but polite. As she turned to walk away, she felt a strange pull, as if something was holding her attention. Maybe it was the way his gaze lingered, curious but not invasive. Or maybe it was her own exhaustion, making her more aware of the moment than she usually would be. Whatever it was, Dinah found herself glancing back at the table as she returned to the counter. Something about this interaction felt different, though she couldn't quite explain why. A few minutes earlier, not far from the cafe, Barron Trump had an unexpected encounter. As he stepped out of his car, a homeless man sitting on the corner lifted his head. His clothes were worn, his face weathered, but his eyes lit up with recognition. Barron hesitated for a moment before something inside him urged him to approach. "Hello, sir," Barron said, his tone polite but warm. "How's your day going?" The man gave a faint smile. "Not too bad, young man. Some days are hard, but I get by. You know, there's one person who makes it a little easier." Barron's curiosity sparked. "Oh, who's that?" Clearing his throat, the man gestured toward the cafe across the street. "The waitress in there, Dinah. She's got a good heart. Even though life's tough for her, she always spares some food or water for me. Did you know her mom's really sick? She works long shifts every day just to pay for her medicine. And yet, she's never stopped being kind, always smiling, always helping others, even someone like me." Barron stood silent for a moment, the weight of the man's words sinking in. He hadn't expected to hear a story like this, let alone about a waitress he was about to meet. It struck him deeply, how someone carrying so much could still choose to give selflessly. Inside the cafe, Dinah was busy preparing Barron's coffee, unaware of the conversation that had just unfolded outside. The hiss of the espresso machine filled the air as she frothed the milk, the sound momentarily grounding her in the rhythm of her work. Still, she couldn't help but glance toward the corner table. There was something about this interaction that felt different, though she couldn't quite put her finger on why. "Why am I like this?" she muttered under her breath, shaking her head slightly. "It's just Barron Trump." Her eyes flicked back toward the table, almost involuntarily. Barron sat there quietly, his posture straight but relaxed. Unlike most patrons, he wasn't scrolling through his phone or tapping away on a laptop. Instead, he stared out the window, his expression thoughtful, almost distant. Every now and then, he took a slow sip of water from the glass she'd placed on his table earlier. There was something calming about his presence, a stark contrast to the usual hurried, distracted energy she'd grown used to in her job. Finally, the cappuccino was ready, the foam settling perfectly on top. Dinah carefully placed the croissant on a plate, adjusting it just so before arranging everything on the tray. By the time she made her way to his table, she'd managed to steady herself. "Here you go," she said, gently placing the coffee and pastry in front of him. Barron looked up, meeting her eyes, and offered a faint smile. "Thank you." "You're welcome," Dinah replied, keeping her tone professional but kind. "Let me know if you need anything else." As she turned to walk back to the counter, something made her pause. Maybe it was the way his gaze lingered, not intrusive, but curious. Or maybe it was her own exhaustion, making her hyper-aware of small details. Either way, her heart fluttered slightly as she continued back to the counter. The cafe grew quieter as the afternoon wore on. Dinah busied herself wiping down tables and refilling sugar containers. Her movements automatic, but purposeful. The soft background music played from the speakers, adding to the stillness. But there was something in the air, an unspoken weight that Dinah couldn't ignore. It was as if something invisible was urging her to pay attention. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed Barron take a pen from his pocket. He leaned over the receipt, scribbling something quickly, his movements deliberate but subtle. He folded the paper neatly and tucked it under his empty coffee cup, his expression unreadable. Then he stood, gathering his phone and coat, moving with the same quiet composure he'd had when he entered. Dinah watched him for a moment, her thoughts swirling. She didn't know why, but this simple interaction had left an impression. "Thank you for coming," she said softly as he passed by her station. Barron turned slightly and gave her a small, sincere smile. "Have a good day." Those words, so ordinary, seemed to linger in the air long after he'd spoken them. Dinah stood still, watching as he exited the cafe with his security detail close behind. The bell above the door chimed faintly, and then the room fell silent again. Something about this moment felt heavier than usual, but Dinah couldn't quite put it into words. The soft chime of the doorbell rang one last time, fading into silence as the cafe returned to its usual stillness. Dinah exhaled slowly, grabbed her tray, and made her way to clear the corner table. The cappuccino cup was empty, a thin layer of foam clinging to the rim. On the croissant plate, only a few crumbs remained. But then, her eyes landed on the receipt tucked beneath the coffee cup. She picked it up carefully, her fingers brushing against the folded paper. It felt heavier than it should, as if it carried more than just numbers. Her first thought was about the tip, likely generous. She assumed wealthy customers often left big tips as an afterthought, a way to compensate for their lack of interaction. Yet when Dinah unfolded the receipt, her breath hitched in her chest. At the bottom, beneath the total, was a number, a tip so large it made her stomach drop. 4 digits, clear as day. But that wasn't all. Above the tip, written in neat handwriting, was a note. "Your kindness and hard work do not go unnoticed. My family has been where you are. Stay strong. Brighter days are coming." Dinah's hands trembled as she reread the words, slower this time, letting every sentence sink in. Her eyes darted toward the door where Barron Trump had exited minutes earlier. The world outside seemed to blur as hot tears welled up and spilled down her cheeks. Her knees weakened, and she sank into the chair across from where he had been sitting, clutching the note in her hand. It wasn't the money that brought her to tears. It was the words, the weight of empathy from someone she never imagined would even notice her existence. For the first time in weeks, maybe even months, Dinah felt truly seen. The tears flowed freely now, her emotions a mixture of gratitude, relief, and the profound realization that someone understood her struggles. She thought about everything those words meant and the kindness they carried. But this moment wasn't over. Not yet. Dinah had a sense that this note wouldn't remain a secret for long. The sound of the cafe door opening jolted her from her thoughts. She quickly wiped her tears with the back of her hand, folding the note and tucking it into her apron pocket just as her manager approached. "Dinah, are you all right?" her manager asked, her expression a mix of concern and curiosity. Dinah hesitated, searching for the right words. I'm fine, she said, though her voice cracked slightly. It's just the tip. It was, really generous. Her manager raised an eyebrow. Generous enough to make you cry? Dinah nodded, managing a weak laugh. She reached into her pocket and handed over the folded receipt. The moment her manager saw the number, her eyes widened, and she let out a low whistle. No way. Who left this? The corner table. Dinah replied softly, still trying to process the moment herself. It was Barron Trump. Her manager blinked, her disbelief evident. The Barron Trump? Are you serious? Dinah nodded again. Yes, she said, carefully pulling the note from her pocket. But it's not just the money. It's what he wrote. She handed the note to her manager as though it were something fragile, something sacred. Her manager read it, and for the first time in months, Dinah saw a genuine softness in her boss's eyes. Wow, she whispered, handing the note back with a reverence that matched Dinah's own. That's incredible. It is. Dinah agreed, folding the note again with care. I don't even know why he wrote it. I didn't do anything special. Her manager looked at her for a long moment before speaking. Sometimes people just know, she said gently. They can see what you're going through, even when you think you're hiding it. You're here every day, working hard, being kind to every customer, even the ones who don't deserve it. Maybe he saw that. Dinah swallowed hard, her throat tight. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear those words. For months, she had been working double shifts, scraping together enough to pay rent and skipping meals to afford her mother's medication. Through it all, she had clung to her kindness as the one part of herself the world hadn't taken. And somehow, he had seen that. The cafe buzzed with a different kind of energy after that. Dinah noticed coworkers whispering near the pastry counter, occasionally glancing toward the table where Barron had sat. Word traveled fast, and before long, one of the baristas approached her. You served him, right? The girl asked, her voice bubbling with excitement. What was he like? Was he nice? Dinah gave a small, tired smile. Yeah, he was really nice. Oh my gosh, I'd lose it, the barista exclaimed with a giggle. That's so wild. Dinah didn't say anything more. She couldn't bring herself to share the note or the tip. It felt too personal, too sacred to put on display. Instead, she kept it to herself, clutching the memory of that quiet moment like a treasure. Dinah's shift ended in a blur, her mind still wrapped around the events of the day. She clutched the folded note in her pocket as she walked home, its presence oddly comforting. It felt like a talisman, a small beacon of light after weeks of darkness. The city streets were quiet, the faint hum of cars in the distance blending with the rhythmic sound of her footsteps. Dinah replayed Barron Trump's words in her head, each line from the note echoing with a weight she couldn't quite explain. For the first time in months, she felt seen, not just as a waitress, but as a person carrying unseen struggles. But the peacefulness wouldn't last. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight peeked through her apartment window, Dinah was startled awake by the incessant buzzing of her phone. Groggily, she reached for it on her nightstand, her heart skipping a beat when she saw the flood of notifications lighting up the screen. Is this you? You're famous now. I can't believe this. Dinah blinked at the flurry of messages, her mind still catching up. One text included a link. With a growing sense of unease, she tapped it. The headline made her stomach drop. Barron Trump leaves heartfelt note and generous tip for waitress, touching the nation. Her heart raced as she sat upright in bed, fingers trembling as she scrolled through the article. The story was all there. Her story, word for word. It recounted her tough shift, the unexpected encounter, the handwritten note, and the life-changing tip. Accompanying the article was a blurry photo of the note itself, written in Barron's neat handwriting. Dinah's breath caught as she recognized the very lines she'd reread over and over the night before. Her hands shook as she scrolled further. Landing on the comments section, hundreds of messages poured in, a mix of admiration and curiosity. This is the kind of story the world needs more of. Barron Trump is such a thoughtful person. I don't care about politics. This is genuinely beautiful. What about the waitress? I hope she's okay. The more Dinah read, the more overwhelmed she felt. Strangers were speculating about her life, her struggles, and her emotions, without knowing anything about who she truly was. She tossed the phone onto her bed, burying her face in her hands. "What am I supposed to do now?" she whispered into the quiet room. The sound of her mother coughing from the next room pulled her back to reality. Dinah lifted her head, the heaviness of the moment settling over her shoulders. She couldn't let herself get swept up in the noise, not with rent due, bills to pay, and a fridge that needed filling. But even as she got up to check on her mother, the strange, weighty feeling lingered. Dinah knew her life had changed in some way, though she couldn't yet grasp how deeply. Things felt different the moment Dinah walked into the cafe that day. It wasn't the usual hum of espresso machines or the familiar greetings from her co-workers that greeted her. It was something else entirely. She could feel it immediately, the weight of curious eyes following her every move. Her co-workers smiled at her in a way they never had before, proud, almost like she'd done something extraordinary. Across the room, a few customers glanced over their coffee cups, whispering quietly, as if trying to confirm what they'd read online. Dinah kept her head down, tying her apron with practiced ease, but she couldn't shake the strange energy filling the room. "Good morning, local hero," her manager called out, grinning widely as Dinah approached the counter. Dinah's cheeks flushed. "I don't feel like one," she muttered, hoping to downplay whatever attention she was receiving. "You should," her manager said, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "What happened yesterday was special, Dinah. Not everyone gets to experience something like that." Her manager's tone was kind, but the words only made Dinah feel more exposed. She didn't think of herself as special. She was just a waitress doing her job. And Barron Trump, he hadn't done what he did for the attention. That much she was sure of. By lunchtime, things spiraled even further. A team of reporters had gathered outside the cafe, their presence impossible to ignore. Cameras, microphones, and bright lights surrounded the entrance, drawing curious onlookers from the street. "Are you serious?" Dinah sighed, peeking out from behind the counter to watch her manager speaking with the reporters. Her stomach churned when one of the reporters caught her eye and offered a polite wave. The gesture was meant to be friendly, but it only made her more anxious. "You're the talk of the town," one of her co-workers teased, nudging her lightly. "Lucky me," Dinah muttered under her breath, trying to hide the unease bubbling inside her. She ducked behind the counter, pulling out her phone for a brief escape. But even there, she couldn't escape the storm. Articles, social media posts, and messages filled her screen, more than she could keep up with. Headlines like "Barron Trump's note of kindness goes viral" and "A story of empathy that's touching hearts everywhere" seemed to be everywhere. The comments were just as overwhelming. "That note probably saved her life." "This is the kind of kindness we need more of." "Stories like this remind me there's still good in the world." Dinah scrolled through, her thumb moving faster than her brain could process the words. Amid the chaos, there was one thought she couldn't shake. This isn't just my story anymore. What had started as a quiet moment between her and Barron Trump had turned into something much bigger. It had become a story about kindness, about how small, thoughtful actions could ripple outward in unexpected ways. But as inspiring as it all sounded, Dinah couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. Later that night, as Dinah trudged home under the dim glow of streetlights, she felt the weight of the day pressing down on her. The chatter, the stares, the reporters, it was all too much. She reached her apartment building, her mind replaying every interaction from the day. When her phone buzzed in her pocket, she pulled it out, the screen lighting up with a message from her manager. "They want you on a morning talk show. Call me." Dinah stopped in her tracks, the words staring back at her. Her feet felt glued to the sidewalk as the implications sank in. A talk show? On TV? The idea sent a chill down her spine. The thought of cameras, lights, and being the center of attention made her stomach twist. "That's not me," she thought. And yet, somewhere in the back of her mind, a quiet voice whispered, it would be nice to explain the story, to let people know what really mattered. Dinah shook her head, shoving the phone back into her pocket. The thought lingered as she climbed the steps to her apartment. She wasn't ready, not yet. As she unlocked her door and stepped inside, the familiar creak of the floorboards grounded her. She needed more time to think, to decide how she wanted to handle all of this. The world had changed around her in less than 24 hours, but Dinah was still the same person she'd been the day before. And for now, that had to be enough. The next morning, Dinah stared at her phone, her heart pounding as she dialed her manager's number. She had wrestled with the decision all night, turning it over and over in her mind. But now, she had made up her mind. When her manager answered, Dinah spoke softly but firmly. "Tell them I'll do the show," she said. There was a pause on the other end of the line, long enough to make Dinah wonder if the call had dropped. Then her manager's voice came back, full of surprise. "Are you sure about this?" "Yes," Dinah replied, her voice steady. "But I don't want to talk about the money. I want to focus on the note, on kindness. That's what really matters." Her manager's relief was palpable. "All right, I'll let them know. This is a big deal. Dinah, you're going to do great." Dinah wasn't so sure. When she arrived at the studio the following day, the nerves hit her all over again. The lights, the cameras, the bustling energy of the crew. It all felt like too much. She smoothed her hands over her lap, trying to ground herself. The set was cozy, with soft lighting and a comfortable sofa where she was directed to sit. The host greeted her warmly, putting her at ease as much as possible. "Just be yourself," the host said with a reassuring smile. "Tell your story the way you want to." As the cameras rolled, Dinah clasped her hands in her lap, her nerves barely hidden behind a calm facade. The host began with a warm introduction. "Joining us today is Dinah, whose story of kindness has captured hearts across the nation." A note and a generous tip from Barron Trump sparked a viral moment. But it's Dinah's resilience and warmth that have inspired so many. "Dinah, thank you for being here." Dinah nodded, offering a faint smile. "Thank you for having me." The host leaned in slightly, her tone gentle but curious. "Dinah, you've become the center of attention over the past few days because of something quite unexpected. A handwritten note and a tip from Barron Trump. Can you tell us how you felt when you first read those words?" Dinah took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "Honestly, it caught me off guard," she began. "But it wasn't about the money. It was what he wrote. I've been going through a really hard time, and those words meant more to me than I can explain." The host nodded, her expression encouraging Dinah to continue. The note said, "Your kindness and hard work do not go unnoticed. My family has been where you are. Stay strong. Brighter days are coming." What do you think Barron meant by those words? Dinah glanced at the host for a moment before turning her gaze directly to the camera. She could feel the weight of unseen eyes watching, and for the first time, she didn't feel afraid. "I think he meant that we all go through struggles," Dinah said, her voice steady and filled with quiet strength. It doesn't matter who you are or where you come from. Everyone has hard times. And sometimes, when you're at your lowest, even the smallest act of kindness can change everything. It reminds you that someone sees you, that you're not alone. The studio seemed to grow quieter as her words hung in the air. The host smiled warmly, her own expression touched by Dinah's sincerity. That's a beautiful message. Dinah, thank you for sharing it with us. Dinah nodded, her hands relaxing slightly in her lap. The weight of the moment felt lighter now, as if speaking her truth had lifted something from her shoulders. For the first time in days, she didn't feel like the spotlight was too much to handle. Instead, it felt like an opportunity to share something bigger than herself, a story about resilience, empathy, and the power of kindness.